On the rainy weekend of October 12th and 13th, 2002, over 3,000 Revolutionary War reenactors from England, Canada, and every corner of the United States converged on Valley View Farms in Fort Edward, New York. They came in honor of the 225th anniversary of the Battle of Saratoga, a military engagement the New York Times called the Battle of the Millennium, as the battle's outcome so significantly changed the course of world history. The 2002 recreation grew to be the largest Revolutionary War reenactment since the bicentennial of Yorktown. And with that, it was a virtual tie. Reenactors are passionate about history. They dedicate enormous amounts of their time and resources toward making history come alive. This program honors that passion by showing the historic battles of Saratoga with images from the 2002 recreation. Even though the setting and the people are different, these images suggest what it might have been like in 1777. At that time, the war for American independence looked bleak for the revolutionaries. The Continental Army had lost a series of battles. Thousands of American soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured. Many others lost heart and went home. Rebelling patriots and those still loyal to the British Crown were at odds throughout the land. The British Commander-in-Chief, General William Howe, soundly defeated George Washington's army and captured the city of New York. But with Washington's bold crossing of the Delaware and victory at Trenton, the leaders in London called for a decisive plan to crush the rebellion once and for all.
By beheading the serpent, the body will wither.
King George III. And that is just what General John Burgoyne proposes. He plans a three-pronged attack to divide and conquer the rebellion. He would lead an invasion southward from Canada, along the strategic Lake Champlain-Hudson River route, capturing forts along the way. At the same time, General William Howe would lead his army north from New York City. And Colonel Barry St. Ledger would lead a smaller force with Indian allies east through the Mohawk Valley. These three armies would converge on the strategic port city of Albany. Thus, New England, hotbed of the revolt and head of the serpent, would be isolated from the rest of the colonies. Stopping the Burgoyne invasion from the north is up to General Philip Schuyler and the several thousand Continental soldiers at his command. Schuyler deploys troops to Fort Stanwix on the western frontier of the Mohawk River and to Fort Ticonderoga at the southern end of Lake Champlain to protect the approaches on Albany. Burgoyne embarked from Canada with a total force of some 9,000 men, including approximately 4,200 British regulars, 4,000 German troops, and several hundred Canadians and Indians, as well as the women and children following the army. Early in his campaign, Burgoyne meets with success. Upon hearing the fall of Fort Ticonderoga on Lake Champlain, King George rushes into the Queen's bedroom shouting,
"I have beaten them! I have beaten all the Americans!"
But before long, the grand plan begins to fall apart. The largely unsettled wilderness areas are not suited for a British army campaigning with a train of artillery and extended supply lines. The roads are essentially non-existent. The British are impeded by rough terrain and American delaying tactics of destroying bridges and blocking roadways. General Howe decides that rather than be the second prong and move northward, he will instead invade Philadelphia in hopes of luring General George Washington into a decisive battle, thus bringing the revolt to a quick end.
My intention is for Pennsylvania, where I expect to meet Washington.
General Howe. As Colonel St. Ledger leads the western prong down the Mohawk Valley, he decides to try to dislodge the American garrison at Fort Stanwix. During the siege of Fort Stanwix, St. Ledger's Indian allies hear that a strong force of Americans are headed their way, and they abandon the campaign. With insufficient men to continue, Colonel St. Ledger returns to Canada instead of joining up with Burgoyne. Burgoyne is now left with no prospect of reinforcement and no supply line. So he sends a raiding party of some 800 German auxiliaries to nearby Bennington to obtain much-needed provisions and horses. But an overwhelming force of New England militiamen ambushed the Germans. By the end of the engagement, all 800 Germans are killed or captured. Burgoyne presses his weakened army on toward Albany. On September 13th, they cross to the west bank of the Hudson above Saratoga. General Schuyler's delaying tactics have allowed disease and desertion to take a heavy toll on the British. Congress blames Schuyler for losing Fort Ticonderoga, and he is relieved of command. General Horatio Gates, a New Englander, is appointed to command the Northern Army. With this change, militia regiments from New England and fresh Continental troops reinforced the American Army. The Americans are now 9,000 strong. General Gates decides to make a stand at Bemis Heights, where the Hudson River and the high bluffs create a natural bottleneck. Gates enlists the brilliant military engineer, Colonel Thaddeus Kosciuszko, a Polish officer serving with the Americans, to oversee the construction of the fortifications. Burgoyne's heavily burdened army must either squeeze through the narrow track between Bemis Heights and the Hudson, or move inland and strike at the rebel defenses on the west. He chooses the latter. On September 19th, 1777, Burgoyne orders his army to advance almost blindly to probe the American left. He personally accompanies the center, while General Simon Fraser and his elite advance corps swing wider to the American left. General Frederick von Riesedel and his Germans are left to guard the precious and dwindling supplies on the river road. American scouts detect Burgoyne's army in motion and notify General Gates. General Benedict Arnold urges Gates to seize the initiative and meet the British head-on. General Gates wants to wait for the British to come up against the well-prepared defenses. After a heated argument between the two American generals, Gates agrees to order out Colonel Daniel Morgan and his Corps of Virginia Riflemen and Major Dearborn's light infantry to track the enemy's advance. Shortly after noon, some of Morgan's men brush with the British advance guard in a clearing known as the Freeman Farm, approximately 1 mile north of the American camp. Morgan's riflemen fire on British skirmishers. The skirmishers retreat, pursued by Morgan and the riflemen. But the riflemen run into the main British line, and a blast of musket fire scatters the riflemen, sending them back into the woods. General Fraser's men emerge from the woods along the British right. Fraser sends 5 companies of his 24th Regiment to attack. But they are pushed back. When all 8 companies of Fraser's 24th counterattack, they secure the flank. General Arnold takes command on the American side. He orders up all his regiments, a few at a time. He sends General Enoch Poor's brigade forward to support Morgan's riflemen. Poor's troops attacked the gap in the British line between Fraser's and Hamilton's troops. But Poor is unable to break through the British line. The British advance with a bayonet charge to push the Americans back to the other side of the clearing. But the British are stalled by heavy musket fire from the American side. Control of the field seesaws back and forth over the farm for more than 3 hours. American rifle fire is taking a toll on the British. Sensing victory might be at hand, General Arnold pleads with Gates to commit more troops to the fight. But Gates wants to keep his force intact along the heights to prevent the Germans from advancing down the river road with the British supplies. Finally, Gates agrees to send General Ebenezer Leonard's brigade into the battle. But he orders Arnold himself to stay off the battlefield. With Leonard's brigade on the field, the British lines begin to waver. In the face of the deadly fire of the numerically superior Americans, the British center weakens. The courage with which the Americans fought were the astonishment of everyone. And we now became fully convinced they are not the contemptible enemy we had hitherto imagined them. Lieutenant Anbury, British 24th Foot. Burgoyne calls up German reinforcements from the river road. Hurling the Germans against the American right, Burgoyne steadies the wavering British line. The Germans tip the balance against the Americans. The Americans are forced to withdraw under the cover of approaching darkness.
On this day has been fought one of the greatest battles ever fought in America, and I trust we have convinced the British butchers that the cowardly Yankees can, and where there is a call for it, fight.
American Major Dearborn.
This crash of cannon and musketry never ceased till darkness parted us, when they retired to their camp, leasing us masters of the field. But it was a dear-bought victory, if I can give it that name, as we lost many men.
William Digby, British 53rd Light Company. It is indeed a dear-bought victory for the British. 160 dead, 364 wounded, and 42 missing. The Americans calculate their losses at 100 dead, 325 wounded, and 40 missing. By the reckoning of the 18th century, the British hold the field and win the battle. However, the road to Albany still belongs to the Americans. Burgoyne knows that his exhausted army needs rest. They cannot take on another engagement too soon. They wait for resupply. During this time, Burgoyne orders construction of log and earthen fortifications around the camp. They build 3 fortifications, totaling nearly 2 miles during the next 16 days. The one guarding Burgoyne's headquarters is called the Great Redoubt. The other 2 fortifications are named for the officers who command them: the Balcarres Redoubt and the Bremen Redoubt.
Camp is by now almost like a fortress.
German Lieutenant Duroy. There is a ray of hope for the British in a letter from General Clinton in New York. The letter is decoded with an overlay in the shape of an hourglass. Sir, W. Howe has gone to the Chesapeake Bay with the greatest part of the army. I hear he has landed, but I am not certain. I am left to command here with too small a force to make any effectual diversion in your favor. I shall try something at any rate. It may be of use to you. I owe to you. I think Sir W.'s move just at this time the worst he could take. Much joy on your success. The hope of reinforcements from Clinton justifies more waiting before the British make another move. The spirit of the British Army, which was high in the beginning of the campaign, now dwindles, along with their supplies.
The army becomes quite fatigued. The number of our sick increased. The sick and wounded, of whom the army had more than 700, had to make do with living in the tents. They could rightfully be pitied in this situation. Actually, many of them died every day. Everything became more expensive from day to day, and many such items as sugar, coffee, tea could no longer be had at all. 1 quart of rum had now to be paid with 8 shillings. A soldier could therefore no longer afford this drink. It was a great relief that every day spruce beer was brewed.
German Lieutenant Duroy. As both armies fortify and prepare for enemy attack, on the American side, the number of soldiers grow by the day, mustering nearly 13,000 men, with more militia regiments on the way.
3rd Division! Attention! Uncover! Dear Lord, we ask that you protect these men as they go into the field of battle.
Honored Father and Mother, I greatly rejoice that I have an opportunity to write to you, for to let you know that through the divine goodness of God I am well at present, and I hope these lines will find you all well. We have had a very hot engagement here on the 19th of this month, which lasted about 3 hours. The militia are coming in every day. The Ulminster men got up here the 24th of September, and I was very glad to see them. It is a general time of health in our army at present. Our army is in high spirits. We expect to have all these regulars soon. We draw fresh beef and flour.
John Buss, American Massachusetts Bay Regiment.
Oh, and it was up the quarter deck I first saw them.
I saw them.
Such an uglier bunch I never seen before.
Before.
The captain and ship they sang I grew a badder.
A badder.
And it made me poor old heart feel sick and sore.
Sore.
Oh, Paddy lay back.
Paddy lay back.
But all is not well within the American command. General Gates' report to Congress on the battle fails to mention Benedict Arnold. General Arnold, believing that Gates is jealous of his courage and leadership, takes offense. Arnold storms into Gates' quarters and the two engage in a heated argument. When Arnold threatens to resign, Gates writes him a pass, effectively relieving him of command. The quarrel spreads to the senior officers.
I did not choose to serve General Gates. I will sooner see him drawn and quartered than do anything for him out of my line. But Arnold, I will cheerfully serve.
Richard Varick, American aide-de-camp. Arnold decides to stay. But with a major victory or defeat at stake, the American commanders are caught up in loathing and distrust of each other. Weeks drag on. The men find camp life tedious. Both sides engage in psychological warfare.
Into my hand this morning was delivered a message from the opposition, and it states, "You are condemned. When you became rebels and took up arms against the king, you sentenced yourselves to death. Our artillery will rain and destruction down upon you with shot and canister. Our cavalry will slice their way through your troops and stragglers before you know they are there. Our infantry are the best trained in the world and will bring devastation upon you with their superior firepower. You have only one choice. Surrender now, and you will live. Liberty or death! Liberty or death! Huzzah!
Tensions and rivalries between the various militia regiments and the Continental troops mount.
The general is sorry to hear jarrings and disputes between the Continental troops and militia regiments. Any officer or soldier of either the Continental troops or the militia convicted of abusive language or striking each other will be immediately confined and punished accordingly.
American Colonel Glover. For nearly 3 weeks, Burgoyne waits for Clinton to send reinforcements. With supplies rapidly diminishing, the British Army grows weaker with each passing day.
Our situation was becoming more critical from day to day. The supplies were getting lower, and a total lack of forage for the horses was to be feared.
German Lieutenant Duroy. Faced by a growing American army, the situation is now critical. Burgoyne can wait no longer. He must choose between advancing or retreating. His officers argue for a retreat to the north. On October 7th, Burgoyne decides to take a half measure. He sends out a portion of his army to probe the American positions and forage for food, a so-called reconnaissance in force. If the Americans are vulnerable, he can launch an all-out attack. If not, he can consider retreat. After marching a short distance, the British reconnaissance force deploys in a wheat field. Foragers begin to harvest the desperately needed grain. An American advanced guard notices the British activity. Scouts report the news to General Gates.
They are foraging and endeavoring to reconnoiter your left. And I think, sir, they offer you battle.
American Lieutenant Colonel James Wilkinson. Let the game begin, Gates proclaims. Colonel Morgan leads his riflemen to the high ground above the wheat field where the British are foraging. General Poor leads his brigade to engage the British left. Both Morgan and Poor attack simultaneously. The British break from the overwhelming force. British officers attempt to bring the confused soldiers to order.
All the different nationalities of our division running pell-mell.
German Captain Pausch. The British lines reform and break, again and again, as more American troops are brought to bear. General Fraser leads the British 24th and the Battalion of Light Infantry against the advancing Americans. On the field of battle with his men, General Fraser is shot and mortally wounded.
The loss of General Fraser helped to turn the fate of the day.
Lieutenant Digby, British 53rd Light Infantry. The shooting of Fraser seems to break the British spirit, and they begin to retreat behind the Balcarres redoubt. Suddenly, Benedict Arnold, who had been relieved of command by Gates, rides onto the field, rallying the Americans forward against the retreating army. Arnold leads Poor's brigade in a series of savage attacks on the Balcarres redoubt. Under heavy fire, the Americans are unable to dislodge the British from their fortification. Arnold wheels his horse and spurs toward the Bremen redoubt, where he joins up with Learned and Morgan. Leaving Learned's brigade, Arnold swings around the rear of Bremen's redoubt as Morgan and the others storm the front.
Our general thought little of danger and forced his way through and spared none till a ball broke his leg and killed his horse. But his brave men drove the enemy from their camp with their tents standing and pots boiling.
Connecticut militia. Only nightfall saved the British from complete and immediate capitulation. They lose more than 400 officers and men. That night, the British commander leaves his campfires burning and withdraws his troops. This time, it is the Americans who win the field of battle. The next day is dreary and rainy. The British begin the retreat northward. The beloved British General Simon Fraser dies of his wounds. He is buried by his request on top of a hill near Burgoyne's headquarters. After a miserable march in the mud and rain, Burgoyne's troops take refuge in a fortified camp on the heights of Saratoga. An American force that had grown to nearly 20,000 men surround the exhausted British army.
Front!
Beneath the rainy October skies, Burgoyne's army has nothing but their blankets to sleep under, with constant sniper fire from the Americans. They had some food, but no water.
The want of water continuing to distress us, we could not be but extremely glad to find a soldier's wife so spirited as to fetch some from the river, an occupation from which the boldest might have shrunk, as the Americans shot everyone who approached it.
The siege drags on for 5 days. Burgoyne and his officers realize that a favorable surrender is their only option.
Under perpetual fire, I have been with my army within the jaws of famine, shot through my hat and waistcoat, my nearest friends killed round me. From these combined misfortunes, I imagine I am reserved to stand a war with ministers in London who will always lay the blame upon the employed who miscarries.
General Burgoyne. Burgoyne negotiates favorable terms with Gates. Instead of a surrender, the Convention of Saratoga concludes the fighting on October 17, 1777. Although General Burgoyne refuses to use the word, the truth is that for the first time in over 200 years, the mightiest army in the world had surrendered. Thus is gained one of the most decisive victories in American and world history.
The minds of the people are much altered. Their late successes have turned the scale, and now they are all liberty mad again. Their recruiting parties could not get a man last week, and now the men are coming in by companies.
Nicholas Creswell, Virginia Loyalist. Encouraged by the stunning victory at Saratoga, France allies itself with America and declares war on England. 4 years later, with help from the French Navy, the Americans defeat the British at Yorktown and win their independence. The Saratoga Convention stipulates that Burgoyne's army would be returned home to never fight again on American soil. But these terms are never honored, because Congress realized that returning these men to England would simply free up other British soldiers to fight in America. Unlike Burgoyne's army, all of the 3,010 reenactors head home. They will fight again for the spectators who come and watch. and learn about the great struggle for the birth of a new, independent nation.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to help us produce more compelling historical content like this, please like, comment below, and share this video with fellow history buffs. And of course, be sure to subscribe to help keep history happening.